Malik Terry is in his first full recruiting cycle with the Ducks, and today we're taking an updated look at Oregon offensive line recruiting in the 2024 class. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How is everybody doing? Hope everybody's having an awesome day. It is Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Just in case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. Thanks again for tuning in to today's episode. Wherever you're tuned in, whether you're listening or viewing here on YouTube, make sure you hit those like buttons and subscribe buttons so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. I'm on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, and it is completely free to subscribe. Greatly appreciate your support. So, where are things at for Oregon football recruiting right now? Well, on Monday, Oregon got a big-time commitment once again, their third commitment in as many days, as 2024 San Jacinto wide receiver Dylan Gresham opted to commit to Oregon over the likes of Washington and Arizona, giving Junior Adams his third wide receiver commit in the 2024 class, along with the likes of Jordan Anderson from Southern California as well, and Tyseer Denmark from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So really big time group coming together for Junior Adams, and I have an updated look at Oregon football wide receiver recruiting in the 2024 class over on ducksdigest.com. Go make sure to give that a read if you haven't already. It is a free story, and it is jam-packed with good intel, looking at guys like Jeremiah McClellan. And who else do you have? You have Jeremiah McClellan, you have Terry Bussey from the state of Texas, Jack Ressler from Mater Dei in Santa Ana, California. So go give that a look if you haven't already. But while all that was going on, this recent run of commitments for Oregon in the 2024 class, Michael Van Buren, Zadavian Sims hopping in the boat on Saturday before Gresham joined them on Monday. Malik Terry had some big-time offensive linemen on campus at Oregon in the 2024 class. And, a pair of them were commits in Trent Ferguson and Fox Crater. And then you had another big one, Brandon Baker, the number one offensive tackle in the 2024 class out of Santa Ana, California, Mater Dei High School. So lots of big names there on campus, but I'm going to get into some of those guys. But let's start right off the top with some pretty big, heavy-hitting news or, a development. That development is I logged a prediction for Oregon to land a major offensive tackle here in the 2024 recruiting class, and that is 2024 Pinson, Alabama, Clay Chalkville offensive tackle Jaquan McRoy. I wasn't totally sure if it was Jaquan or Jaquan. I've heard Jaquan, so I'm going to go with that. We're rolling with it. Jaquan McRoy out of the state of Alabama, a massive target for Malik Terry and the rest of his offensive line staff at Oregon. 4-star caliber guy on the 247 Sports Composite, .9313. He's a huge dude, as you can see there. His huddle tape says 6'8", 365. 247 has him listed at 6'8", 335 pounds. So all that being said, he is a massive body in the trenches for the Ducks that they're looking after, that they're pursuing here in the 2024 class. Just getting back to the rundown on the 247 Sports recruiting profile, 4-star guy, number 169 player in the country, the number 12 offensive tackle, and the number 10 recruit in the state of Alabama in the 2024 class, that is. The Ducks are also pursuing Jordan Ross, the number 1 player in the state of Alabama this cycle, big-time edge rusher out of the Birmingham area. So right now, I logged my prediction for Jaquan McRoy to commit to Oregon, and I put my confidence meter at 6 out of 10. So it's maybe not the most confident pick. I feel like I'm confident that it's going to happen, but, a lot can change between now, May 23rd, and a rumored commitment date of June 30th. So that's a whole month to take more visits, see other schools, have schools come see him out in the state of Alabama, but it's also maybe a chance for him to get back to the Oregon campus for an official visit. So right now we know that Jaquan McRoy has Oregon in his top 10. And as you would expect with any high profile recruit from the Southeast, Oregon is not the only big school that is in the running there for Jaquan McRoy here in the 2024 class, the Under Armour All-American. So the other schools that are in the running for Jaquan McRoy right now in the 2024 class, he's working from a top 10 that is as follows: Oregon, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn, Arkansas, Miami, Kentucky, Florida, Georgia, and Ole Miss. So a lot of really, really powerful programs in the mix for Jaquan McRoy, but Oregon's still in there. So why is it that I am logging this pick? Well, I think part of the reason is because of Oregon's ties in the state of Alabama. Carlos Lachlan is from the state of Alabama, and he's one of the guys that has developed a strong relationship with Jaquan McRoy, one of the better tackles in what I think some industry experts are saying is a relatively thin offensive line class. So Carlos Lachlan is part of the reason that I think the Ducks have a really good shot here. You know, he has been a really, really strong recruiter, but he doesn't like to be called a recruiter. He likes to be called a relationship builder when it comes to the recruiting process. So I think that Carlos Lachlan is part of the reason that the Ducks still have a good shot with Jaquan McRoy, still have a shot with various top guys in the Southeast. That is definitely one of the faces of their recruiting efforts in the Southeast. Can't count out Tosh Lapoy either from his days at Alabama. He's got some ties there. And then I also think that just Alik Terry has really attacked the recruiting trail with a serious intensity. And I think that he definitely has something to prove as the new offensive line coach at Oregon. Because I think that there might have been a little bit of skepticism around his hire when Dan Lanning chose to bring him on board after Adrian Clem left. You know, he's a really young coach. He's only 27, but with that youth, you also get a guy who, you know, Alik Terry, he said it a bunch of times that this is his dream job. You know, he doesn't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. He's just been all over the country, hitting the recruiting trail, hitting the road, going to see guys. And I think that he has made it a point to go see guys, you know, hit his top targets in person. And I think that that could be something that sets them apart in their pursuit of a guy like McRoy. You know, not just having someone from a school come see a guy, but having your position coach come to see you. I think that those are kind of some of those things that can really help Oregon when it comes to their recruitment of top guys in the 2024 class. You know, just it's a little bit of another personal layer that I think makes a recruitment special. And, you know, from some of the people that I've talked to around the program, you know, around, Eugene, I think that they're liking the Ducks' chances here too. So all that said, there's plenty of good buzz and reason to be excited and, you know, confident that this could happen, but it's a guy from Alabama at the end of the day. So it's far from a done deal. You know, those are not easy guys to pull. Oregon's done it in the past with guys like Tanner Bailey from Gordo, Alabama. And then you also have TJ Dudley, another linebacker from the state of Alabama. I think it was Montgomery Catholic. That said, both of those guys did decommit in the 2022 recruiting class, but I think that was largely due to Mario Cristobal's departure and the staff more or less, you know, kind of falling apart and, you know, going to new stops. So I say that to say that Oregon's done it before. They've made that push into Alabama before, and they're trying to do it again with McRoy, trying to do it again with Jordan Ross. So I think right now I'm feeling pretty good about that pick, but like I said, a lot can change. I'll have to do an update if I get any new intel. But I think right now I'm really liking Oregon for Jaquan McRoy. So who are some other big linemen that the Ducks are going after, or some other big linemen here in the 2024 class? Let's talk about Fox Crater for a second, because, you know, he's been committed to Oregon for a while, but he has been taking, you know, a number of visits to some really big schools. And because that happened, you know, that kind of gave Oregon a little bit of a you know, a jolt, right? Or a little bit of, you know, cause for concern, because Oregon hasn't been a school that is going to drop a kid's commitment because he wants to take visits. Like they don't do that. I think that schools like Clemson, schools like Oklahoma, they've been very adamant about not having their commitments take visits to other schools. I want to say that Brent Venables kind of likened it to a marriage, but I could be remembering that wrong. So either way, Fox Crater's taken a lot of big visits lately. And the one that I think really caught my eye, other than the recent visit to Oregon this past weekend, was to USC. So now you have a Pac-12 foe that's trying to poach one of Oregon's top commits, and he's going to give them a look. Obviously, he went out to see, and that he told me that's why he's taking all these big visits before they really started. It wasn't because Clem left; it's because he wants to make sure that Oregon is the best decision for him, best decision for his family. So you can never fault a guy for that. It's just part of the recruiting process. But all that said, I think it's a great development that the Ducks got him back on campus this past weekend. Maybe you can try to get him to slow things down a little bit, show him why Oregon was the place for him, show him the plan that you have in place, maybe talk about some other offensive linemen that you feel good about, maybe a guy like a Jaquan McRoy. They would love to pair those two together as, some big-time offensive tackles in the 2024 haul. So if you can get him back on campus, hopefully you can, shore things up a little bit, answer any questions or concerns that he might have, because it's May right now, and then you have about 6 to 7 months, I should say, you're looking at for that early signing period, which comes in December. And I know that Oregon wants to try to get as many of those guys to sign early as they possibly can. But it's also, with Fox Crater, he committed early for a reason. It's because the Ducks prioritized him, and he prioritized the Ducks. This is a guy that visited Oregon for almost every home game, I want to say. So there's a lot of love for the Ducks there. And then when I talked to him most recently, he said, I'm not going to throw months of relationship building, out the door. And he's continued to rise on the recruiting trail, and Oregon's been a school that has prioritized him. And, they were one of those earlier offers, I think, in his recruitment. So that, I think, carries some weight too, just saying, hey, we've been riding with you for a while. We were here before all these other big schools that offered you after you were committed to us. We're in the picture. So the longevity and loyalty, I think, is another thing that plays into Oregon's favor. Definitely really important that they got him back on campus for a visit. And then you also have Trent Ferguson, who's, a little bit of a low flyer on the radar as far as a recruiting prospect. He's a guy, I want to say he's like 6'7", 6'8", another huge dude, a little bit newer to football, but, his athletic background is, I think, what really makes him appealing. Former basketball player, former lacrosse player. So he has a very intriguing athletic background, and, the way that he bends, the way that he moves for his size, I think he has all those tools that you're looking for and another, standout Oregon offensive lineman. And then if you have him in your backyard, out in Salem, a guy that you think can contribute and help take your program to the next level, and maybe he's not an early impact kind of guy, but maybe he, red shirts and does a year and some change, and then he's able to, really take his game to the next level and become like a Ryan Walk type of story. And maybe he even has a head start there because he's coming to Oregon as a scholarship guy versus Walk, who was a walk-on. So Trent Ferguson is a guy that I think I'm getting a little bit more excited about as time goes on here for Oregon in the 2024 class, and as this offensive line group starts to kind of take shape. There was another interesting development on the recruiting trail for Oregon with regard to the offensive line position. And that's coming from one of Oregon's top targets in the 2024 class. That is Sugar Land, Texas, Fort Bend Christian Academy, Bennett Warren. He's a big-time offensive lineman out of the state of Texas that the Ducks have been recruiting. And on Monday, he posted that he had canceled his official visit to Oregon. He said, quote, looking at the tweet, "I will no longer be going on an official visit to the University of Oregon on June 23rd through the 25th. So that's, a notable update, right? For one of your top guys that was going to be visiting the University of Oregon to be switching things up, change of plans. And then it's interesting when people go on social media to kind of clear the air versus just, I guess, handling it behind the scenes, if that's the right way to put it. But here's the tweet. So I thought that that was an interesting development. And, I've done a little bit of digging, and it kind of just seems like the two sides didn't really see eye to eye in terms of timeline. With plans like right now, a lot of guys are trying to commit in the summer months or before their senior season starts. But Oregon's still in the running for a lot of top tier offensive linemen and a lot of their top targets. So Oregon's still recruiting. A guy like Jaquan McRoy, Brandon Baker. Eddie Pierre-Louis is another guy out of the state of Florida that the Ducks are pretty high on. So at a certain point, it kind of just becomes a little bit of a numbers game. And I think that that might be what's going on here a little bit with Oregon in the 2024 class in terms of the guy. And you also have Isaiah Garcia out of the state of Utah, another really, really good player that Oregon has high interest in and has high interest in the Ducks. I think that one, the last I heard, it was kind of looking like an Oregon versus USC battle. Gotta check in with him and see what the updated timeline's looking like for him. But this was a significant update that I think was worth a mention when you have a top target that was going to be taking an official visit, and then he was going to be here on that big weekend for Oregon on June 23rd. So that's no longer the case, as Bennett Warren, he hasn't necessarily eliminated Oregon in his recruitment by any means. I'm not saying that. But when you have a development like this, it's definitely worth a mention with schools like Oklahoma, Texas A&M. I think they're also in the running in this recruitment. So that's definitely worth a mention. So Eddie Pierre-Louis, let's talk about him for a second. I think Eddie Pierre-Louis is one of the more intriguing, different offensive linemen that the Ducks are recruiting out of Tampa Catholic High School in Tampa, Florida. He took a visit out to Oregon in the month of April, and I think he really, really liked it. And he is, 6'4", 315 pounds, and he also runs sprints on the track. So, this is a guy that is just a unique, different type of talent. When you're looking at the offensive line position, I think it's just, look at this guy move. You don't see guys that size have that kind of speed, and he's probably has like at least 70 pounds on some of these other guys that he's running against. So you just have a freak, phenomenal athlete that you want to add to your offensive line. And then the state of Florida, Alik Terry is a Miami native. So I think that could help maybe strengthen Oregon's chances a little bit. I don't believe that Eddie Pierre-Louis has an updated group of top schools right now. He's gotten to take a couple other visits this spring. Tennessee is one. Miami is one. UCF, excuse me. University of Central Florida is another school that's gotten a visit. Texas is in the mix. Texas A&M. So you have some of these really heavy hitters in terms of, blue bloods or just big names on the recruiting trail that are going after Eddie Pierre-Louis here in the 2024 class. So I know that Oregon's going to keep swinging, and I think that that's, definitely an important development. So we have two more guys that we want to talk about on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. And I think another one that is obviously really important is Brandon Baker, the number one offensive tackle in the country out of Mater Dei. Oregon legacy. You guys know the story. His brother played for Oregon. And I think one of the interesting things here is that he was one of those guys that was on campus this past weekend. Because before the spring game, I was talking to Brandon, and he was saying, oh, hey, it might look like I'm going to be going to Oregon back-to-back weekends, April 22nd and April 29th. But that was no longer the case. That didn't end up being the case. But he did come out for the spring game, and that was huge. And then now you look at this past weekend, less than a month later, who's back on campus? Brandon Baker. So you have some really, really big schools, like I was just talking about with Eddie Pierre-Louis. You have some serious schools in contention here, right? You have Georgia, you have Nebraska, you have Florida State, USC is also in the mix, and they're not going to go away. So I think I'm starting to feel more confident about Brandon Baker ending up being a Duck. I don't know if I'm where I was in the fall, because I think that most people would agree that they would not have been surprised at all, myself included, if Brandon Baker did end up committing to Oregon, in the fall. So now, after that little bit of a reset in his recruitment, that's kind of what he called it when Adrian Clem took the job with the Patriots, when Vianney Telemaival, another big recruiter on Oregon's offensive line staff last year, when those guys took new jobs. Vianney now is the offensive line coach at Stanford. When those guys took new jobs, it was time for Oregon to ramp it up again. And I think that Alik Terry has done a really good job of that. Another guy that he's prioritized here in the 2024 class. He talked about wanting to have that good intentional time with the coaching staff at Oregon, and how he's kind of come out in the past for a spring game, or, he's kind of big events. And I think that this past weekend was just that opportunity, a little bit more of a low key, under the radar weekend. I'm actually supposed to go see Baker today at practice and get an update on that trip. So hopefully all that works out. But I think that was the trip that the Ducks needed to have to get him back on campus, and to see the recency there. Some of these visits, they come together, pretty last minute. I think that that's huge, because you have almost every school in the country, these really, really elite programs battling right there with Oregon to get this guy on campus. And I'm sure they've been visiting him at Mater Dei as well. No shortage of talent there. The Ducks got Lipe Moala out of Mater Dei in the 2023 class. And then you also have DeAndre Carter, one of the top interior offensive linemen in the country, in the 24 class out of Mater Dei as well. So I think Oregon's doing a really good job to make up some serious ground here with Brandon Baker. And, they've attacked that recruitment with the urgency that it's needed. And I think that you're seeing, especially because we haven't seen a game yet, I think you're seeing Alik Terry make all the right moves as that Oregon offensive line coach, at his dream school, coming back after being the former offensive line GA under Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal. So there's a lot of good stuff, I think, on the way for Oregon from an offensive line position, because it's so easy to recruit to a school like Oregon. I'm not saying that what the staff's doing is easy and anybody could do it, but it's not hard to make a pitch to top offensive line recruits to come to Oregon. I mean, look at some of the guys that ended up in the NFL from the last draft, right? You had Alex Forsyth, who ended up in Denver. You had Big Sala, who ended up in Baltimore. Penei Sewell was a top 10 pick as an offensive lineman to Detroit. So they've really laid the foundation, and they have that track record now of developing offensive linemen. And I think that that's going to really pay dividends for a guy like Brandon Baker, who's a West Coast guy. And, we've said it before, but maybe it bears repeating. West Coast guys are more realistic at the end of the day for Oregon. It's easier to get a guy like maybe a Brandon Baker, or, like a Devin Brooks from Clackamas, Oregon. It's easier to get those guys that are closer, can make those trips more easily. You can go see them more easily than these guys across the country like Jaquan McRoy or Eddie Pierre-Louis. But you still have to take those swings. You still have to try to get those guys, and that's what Oregon's doing. I think that Oregon's still just going after these elite guys in the trenches on both sides of the ball. I talked about how the Ducks are swinging for the fences in 2024 on the defensive line. And I think when you're in contention for some of these guys that I've mentioned today, I think you're seeing that on the offensive line as well. So Devin Brooks is a guy that I also want to do a little bit more digging on. I think it's been Oregon, SC, Washington as his top schools for a while. He doesn't really seem like he's in a rush in his recruitment, but I think he's still going to get a serious look from Oregon, because he is one of those top in-state guys that I think can probably contribute to Oregon if he ends up, being a Duck at some point. So I think things are looking really good for Oregon on the recruiting trail. Kind of trying to see who's maybe going to be next to hop in the boat. Don't have any major dates to watch for right now. Maybe more so towards the end of June, I think, is when you're looking to maybe get an update for that. But a lot of talented guys are looking at Oregon, and Oregon's in a really good spot for a lot of guys. So that's ultimately where you want to be. But the summer is where you set yourself apart, because a lot of these guys want to wrap up their decisions, get their recruitments wrapped up so they can just focus on football. And, can't blame them. Recruiting is a stressful process. As cool as it looks on the surface, these guys are taking trips every weekend. It feels like their phones are blowing up and they just want to be kids at the end of the day. But, when you're a big time football talent, these top programs are going to come after you hard. And that's just the reality of where it's at. So everyone's kind of got a different way they react to it and manage the process. But that's an updated look at Oregon football recruiting along the offensive line in the 2024 class. Greatly appreciate you guys for taking some time out of your day to talk some Ducks with me, talk some Cruton, talk some Oregon football. A couple reminders before we get out of here. Make sure you lock in with me on social media at Torres Sports on Instagram and Twitter, and at Oregon Football Max Torres on YouTube. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss an episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Traveling all over the Western region and, even getting out to Arizona last week. That was really fun. Maybe I'll do a podcast about that. But, just covering the Ducks on the recruiting trail to the best of my ability and having a fun time doing it. So that'll do it for us on today's episode of the podcast. Share the podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. Really appreciate your guys' support. And until next time, thank you guys so much for listening and watching another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.